I have been a little bit stressed out with how much stuff is just airing right now. We've got a bunch of stuff I'm reviewing over my secondary channel. We've got new Doctor Who, which puts videos here, which means those are even more work. And I'm still trying to maintain my Saturday schedule. It has been stressful, but honestly, I appreciate it because it's nice being able to have a Doctor Who video go up and have something fun in between all this nonsense, because next week's not going to be fun either. My alternate opening joke that I was considering was part of the problem with things getting so bad in both the US and the UK at the same time is so much of my lineage is English. I can't even go back to where I came from and be okay. So there you go. You get a 2-for-1 for opening joke, question mark. But anyways, we're going to talk about what has happened in the UK recently, specifically in regards to a judgment made by the UK Supreme Court in regards to trans people. Now, there's a couple of things I want to be clear about this before I get into it. Firstly, I'm not a lawyer. And more than that, I don't really even know the fundamentals of English law. I know that in many areas there isn't that much of a difference between UK and American law, but there are a lot of small nuances and differences. So I'm already out of my depth just trying to read legal stuff in the US, but I at least kind of understand the basic foundations of some of it. The UK, I'm already kind of flying blind with that. So the ruling we're going to be talking about, this happened on April 16th, and there was a 4-page press version that was put out, and then the actual judgment is 88 pages. At my best, I was never going to be able to parse all this stuff, and even if I could feel like I understood it, as I said, I don't have the base of knowledge to be confident that anything I said would actually be accurate. And that's before we deal with the fact that there is a national shortage on my freaking ADHD meds, and I've been off them for 2 weeks now, so yeah, there was no way in hell I was going to be able to successfully parse this ruling. So if you're looking for a full breakdown of the legal mechanics of this judgment, I can't give you that, and I'm not going to try. That having been said, I can tell you what I do feel very confident that I understand, what is lacking in it, some of the consequences we're already seeing, who's celebrating this, and what they intend to do next. Because all of that I can understand and that I can share with you. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about the UK when I am an American, well, I actually have a decent sized UK audience, partially because I talk about Doctor Who as much as I do, but also like it's not okay what's happening if it's anywhere. And like I don't have the spoons to talk about every single country that does some sort of thing that is restricting of trans rights or harmful for trans people, but I need to not just only do America. Like, I can't do everything. I'm only one person, but I think that I've talked plenty about what's going on here, and it's still going on, to be clear, but I have friends in the UK, and I don't want them to think that I'm not noticing what's going on over there. So, let's get into this thing. The very short version is that the UK Supreme Court unanimously decided that the 2010 Equality Act, when referring to the terms man, woman, or sex, referred explicitly and only to biological sex. Now, what this means is that any protections under the Equal Rights Act that are applied for women don't apply to trans women. Now, that's the broadest possible sense. Another little bit of context that is worth putting out there. In the UK, they do have gender recognition certificates. I might be speaking slightly out of turn on this. I think that is sort of their equivalent of like getting permission to have the data on your birth certificate changed in the US, or at least it kind of is intended to serve a similar legal means in terms of your status. Um, I don't know if what I'm about to say is literally true, but it certainly feels like this ruling kind of renders gender recognition certificates meaningless. Now, that's possibly an overstatement on my part. They may serve other functions, but one of the main things that they have effectively done is said, hey, regardless of what this person's gender was at birth, this is what they are recognized as now, and they should be treated accordingly in all matters, including legal. That doesn't really seem to apply anymore, at least in anything that is related in any way to the Equality Act. Because it is worth noting that this ruling, this judgment, is specifically about the application of the Equality Act. Now, that still has some far-reaching implications, but it is not a sweeping in all matters, in all things, that trans people should always be treated and considered as the gender that they were assigned at birth, what they are calling biological sex. It's not quite that far-reaching, but it is pretty far-reaching in a way that I don't feel comfortable trying to parse, because again, I don't know enough about how many facets of life over there the Equality Act actually touches. I'd imagine it's a lot, but I don't have a breakdown, and I'm not going to be able to wrap my head around it. Now, while, as I said, I am not prepared to try and parse 88 pages of legalese based on a system that I don't actually know very well, and I can only barely say I kind of understand the American system. Again, not a lawyer. But I can tell you that there were a few scant things that I do feel comfortable kind of pointing out about the ruling. And I am going to pull this from the full judgment, not the press summary, because I want to be as accurate as I can. The first is how they define biological sex, which is really thinly. Under terminology, they say that biological sex is basically just sex assigned at birth. And that's it. And that is not a lot to go on. I know that for certainly the TERFs and the gender critical movement, they always like to pretend like it's all very simple. But if you actually stop and think about what this means as a practical matter, this is so simple as to be unhelpful and harmful and definitely limiting. Here's what I mean by that. When we say sex assigned at birth, that is just a doctor looking at a newborn's genitals and making their own determination. It is literally just the doctor's best guess. A doctor that may be overworked and might have to be rushing off to go do something else. A doctor who is human, and humans make mistakes, just statistically. But even setting that aside, some people have ambiguous genitals at birth, or are intersex in some way. But the terminology that the court is using, as they define it within this judgment, does not make a single mention of the more complicating factors of sex assignment. Things like, for instance, chromosomes, which are not mentioned once in this entire document. So what this is basically saying is, based off one person's at-a-glance determination, that is what you will be for the rest of your life, no matter what. Just think about that for a second. No matter how much you trust doctors, no one is perfect, no profession is perfect, and some people do not have a straightforward situation that you could just get at a glance. And yet, whatever was put on a document, based off just looking from one person, is going to be what you're stuck with for the rest of your life. Regardless of whether or not there are more complicating factors, regardless of whether or not your chromosomes actually don't match your genitals, which does in fact happen. Because another term that is not in the entire document is intersex. There is not a single mention, and unless I am missing something, it really seems like from a legal perspective, again, at the very least in regards to the Equality Act, intersex people functionally don't exist. They need to be considered as either a man or a woman, regardless of what is actually going on with them. And now, the term non-binary does appear twice within that document, but only to state that it won't be regarded because the UK does not issue gender recognition for non-binary identities, nor do they honor ones that are issued by other countries. And again, I cannot stress enough, this is a massive, sweeping alteration and restriction and just change in terms of the legal standing of trans people. And it all comes down to one person wrote this down on a paper however many years ago, and now you are stuck with it no matter what. So there is zero scientific basis for the court's classification of biological sex as being sex determined at birth, because when it's written down on your birth certificate, they're not testing your chromosomes. It's not based off anything other than observation of your exterior genitalia. And of course, chromosomes are a complicating factor because it's not just XY and XX. There are quite a few variations that can happen. And the court considers none of this because if they actually considered the real science behind sex and gender, they wouldn't have been able to make this kind of sweeping judgment. Which is why I'm putting so much emphasis on this, even though the majority of transgender people are not intersex so far as the data shows. In order to apply this overly broad binary view of sex, they have to disregard an entire kind of person and pretend they don't exist. So we're already off to a really bad start. Now, as I said, this ruling technically only affects the interpretations of the Equality Act. So as I said, protections for women will not apply to trans women and protections for men won't apply to trans men. So if, for instance, a trans woman is harassed or discriminated against on the basis of being a woman, which many trans women are perceived as, they have no protection for that. Because as far as the Equality Act is now concerned, regardless of how you now look, regardless of how you are now perceived, regardless of how other people treat you, you're a man. And so if you are getting, harassed, treated, mistreated, or discriminated against based off the fact that you clock as a woman, you don't have protection for that because, well, you're not a woman, so you don't get those protections. Of course, that is not to imply that only people who quote-unquote pass are entitled to rights. That's absolutely not the case, and I don't want you to think that that's what I'm saying. But it is worth noting that there are trans women who look like this, and as a result, will be treated by most people as a woman. But they will have none of the protections that a woman assigned that at birth would have. In terms of practical matters for the kind of stuff that can happen, well, it's hard for me to extrapolate out. Like I said, I don't know how many different aspects of life the Equality Act touches. But what I can give you is an example of something that was already changed. In fact, it changed almost immediately after the ruling came down. And that is the arrest and search policies for the transport police. They amended their strip search policy, which previously had women officers handling both cis and trans women, and men officers handling both cis and trans men. Now, as it is, a trans woman, regardless of possession of a gender recognition certificate, and regardless of her current physical appearance, state, or even what genitals she currently is in possession of, will be strip searched by a man. And please keep in mind, these are not prisoners, and this is not about what jail people get sent to. These aren't necessarily even people who are actually guilty of anything, because an arrest does not automatically equate to guilt. And again, this change happened almost instantly. Now, naturally, this is also going to bring about the enforcement of what gender criticals have claimed to want for a long time, which is the idea of single-sex spaces. This has been at the heart of so many gender-critical and TERF talking points from the beginning, but especially in the UK. But of course, the talking point is always about we're keeping men who just say that they're transgender out of women's spaces like bathrooms, lockers, etc. And they may claim that this does that, but it doesn't. Not really. Because first of all, it is going to force trans men, some of whom look like this, into women's spaces. And if you think that that's going to go over all peachy keen, it's not. Not for anybody. Not for the trans men, not for the gender critical people, not just for people who are just trying to use the spaces normally and suddenly somebody with a full beard and who's balding is in there and having to say, I'm sorry, the law says I have to be here, which is the other thing. The scenario that they're always throwing out, that conservatives, gender criticals, and TERFs are always saying, I was like, oh, some guy can just claim that he's trans and just walk on in there. Well, you know what's going to happen now? At least will happen as much as that ever happened, which for the record is almost never. But if we're dealing with hypotheticals, let's be upfront. This doesn't fix that problem because now those same men who want to creep on women that you are convinced trans women actually are, but those same people can just stroll in and go, oh, I was assigned female at birth. I'm supposed to be in here. So this doesn't even fix their surface level thing that they claimed was what they were fighting for, but it never was. Now, to be clear and fair and balanced, trademark some more news. The Equality Act does actually say you are not permitted to discriminate against someone who has had gender reassignment and has their gender recognized as having changed. Basically has a gender recognition certificate. You are not actually allowed to discriminate them on that basis. But of course, you can only discriminate against somebody for being trans if you know they're trans, which brings us right back to what we were talking about before, which is be they trans man or trans woman, anyone who clocks and looks like the gender that they in fact are, but who is being treated as such by another person, and that person is discriminating them on the basis of, well, you're a woman and I'm being misogynistic to you and I'm treating you poorly for that. Trans people wouldn't have those protections. And it's only going to apply if it's clear that the other person even knows that they're trans. Of course, this is a group that insists we can always tell, which is demonstrably not true. Follow Mia Moore over on Twitter for prime examples of why that's absolutely not the case. But you know what? I'm sure for some people, the fact that the Equality Act says you can't discriminate against someone just because they're trans means that this doesn't really even change anything. This isn't really a problem. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. This is just clarifying some stuff. It's just clearing up some confusion. You still have protections under the Equality Act. What are you even complaining about? Well, first of all, that entire line of thought has the exact same tone and flavor as the right-wing grifters in the US who kept saying that Roe v. Wade being overturned wouldn't actually change anything.
It's all Roe v. Wade overturning means that Colorado, can have abortion like they have all the way up until 9 months, and Texas can have a heartbeat bill.
Yeah.
So again, it's going to be let 1,000 flowers bloom. It's going to be each state gets to decide on its own specific abortion protocols, which is precisely what the Constitution suggested at the time.
Most abortions now, even when you go to a clinic, are done with the pill.
Yeah.
The pill. And pills are easy to get in America. We know that.
They were lying too. Of course it was a big deal. They knew it was a big deal, and you could tell they knew it was a big deal by who was celebrating it. Which, that's a topic that unfortunately brings us inevitably again to J.K. Rowling. She decided to do a little victory lap with this skin-crawling tweet. And you know what? I wish I could appreciate the irony of the fact that she is pulling a quote and a little bit of a pose that is inspired by a character made famous by an actor who is alleged to have ensured that his female co-star from the first season was fired because he wanted all men in leading roles for that damn show. But this whole thing's too gross for me to even appreciate that with an ironic chuckle. And make no mistake, this should be taken very literally. She is taking credit, and this was a plan. She helped fund the lawsuit brought by 4 Women Scotland that brought this case to the Supreme Court in the first place. She put £70,000, nearly $100,000 US, into their coffers for them to be able to bring this suit. She funded this, and she's taking credit for it publicly. So, first of all, I never want to hear again how supporting Harry Potter does not directly fund transphobia, because this is what your Harry Potter money bought. But the thing is, this gross tweet actually makes a point that I want you all to internalize. It is important, now probably more than ever, to realize, appreciate, and understand. Laws change because people organize and have a plan. The law is malleable, and if you know how to come at it and have the backing to do so, you can change it. And that, in and of itself, is kind of neutral because it can be done in either direction. Every single protection and benefit you currently enjoy exists because people fought for it and had a plan on how to achieve it. Weekends, overtime, child labor laws, the Civil Rights Act, women's right to vote, all of it only exists because people planned and worked, and I really feel like way too many of us have lost sight of that. There's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And I think he's right. But I think he's right for reasons too many of us have forgotten, if we ever understood it. I think that when he said that, he understood that with continued work, for all the struggles and how long it takes, we will make progress. It will bend in the correct direction with the pressure being applied. But I think too many people, or at the very least too many people in privileged positions, have a tendency to see a quote like that and think, oh, well, the arc of the moral universe just bends toward justice. It's just headed there on its own. That'll take care of itself, won't it? No. No, it won't. I have said before that part of the reason the right has regained so much ground is because they have never lost sight of the fact that this is a fight. All of these are battlegrounds, and they have never stopped treating it like a fight. But a whole bunch of the rest of us did. Far too many, who are people who don't want to see rights reversed or revoked, are acting like, well, it's a finished issue. Once the right is secured, you can relax. It'll always be there. It's in the law books now. We don't have to worry about it. No, you have to fight to keep whatever rights and privileges and benefits that you have. You have to fight to keep them just as much as people fought to get them for you in the first place. And we are currently living in the reality that exists when you don't bother to do that. We are watching the rollback of queer rights, not just trans people. It won't stop there. We are seeing child labor laws be discussed being rolled back in places like Florida. Everything can be undone if you do not defend it. And make no mistake, it does not stop at trans people. It was never going to stop at trans people. And I know some people are going to say this is hyperbolic. No, let's actually talk in detail about the next target that UK TERFs have already picked. As a case study, we're going to look at Jess Gill. Now, Ms. Gill is the founder of Women's Safety Initiative in the UK. And right after the ruling, she tweeted out this.
We've won the battle against trans ideology. Now it's essential that the gender-critical community speaks up about the dangers of mass immigration for women. Women and girls are being raped and harassed across the country. If you truly care about women's safety, you need to speak out against this.
So sorry. Oh, my cat is here. He's concerned by that voice. Hi, Kipo.
An instant pivot from protect us from men in our spaces to protect us from immigrants. Barely a pause, barely a breath, instant shift. And it was always going to happen. And just to make the point, let's actually examine that sign being held up in the middle right there. The one that says 1 in 4 sex crimes is committed by foreign nationals. Let's set aside for the moment citation needed on that statistic. Let's, for the moment, take it at face value. Who are the other 3 out of 4? 75% are not done by immigrants or foreign nationals. You are provably going after a minority, not just an ethnic or racial or social minority. You are singling out the minority of offenders. Even if that number is real, you have made it your priority to try and stop immigrants who are at most a quarter of the problem. And what's more, even if that number is real, they are ignoring what percentage of actual immigrants or foreign nationals are committing any kinds of crimes at all. They picked out a specific crime so they could pull a percentage, and they're using it as a proposal to stop immigration as a whole, deliberately ignoring what a small percentage of immigrants or foreign nationals are committing any degree of crimes, or how many are women or children, but just saying we have to stop all of them. Because that's always the point. If you actually cared about the safety of women, why would you do this? Why would this be your approach? Of course, the 75%, the 3 out of 4, those are red-blooded Englishmen, and she has no interest in getting rid of them. She practically says as much. Unless you think that this is an outlier and just a her problem, let us not forget that Kelly J. Keane Minshall has regularly had neo-Nazis supporting her at her events, and 2 years ago, a woman at a gender-critical rally literally quoted Mein Kampf into a microphone while justifying her stance against trans people. These are not outliers. This is the movement. And if they feel like they've won, they're not going to disperse and go home and put their feet up no matter how many selfies holding cigars J.K. Rowling puts out. They are going to do what fascists always do, which is to move on to their next target. Whether Jess Gill pivoted now because she thinks they've actually won, or because she wants to just harness the momentum of a win to push on to the new issue, it doesn't really matter. Her pivot from transphobia to xenophobia is emblematic, and it's one much of the gender-critical movement has already made, and I expect we'll see a large pivot in this direction from their biggest figureheads. Rowling already decided to start swiping at asexuals, which I talked about in this video. Why would she stop there? It hasn't really cost her anything after all, and these are her friends now. This judgment is emblematic of TERF thinking. It takes the I'm sorry, no matter how much you think it's simple, quite complicated subject of sex and boils it down to what one person thought they saw and wrote down on a piece of paper. It ignores science, it ignores humanity, it's trying to force a complex world to take the shape of a simple one that conforms to what they want. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the head of the supposedly left-leaning Labour Party, has already embraced the ruling wholeheartedly. And not just in the usual mealy-mouthed, oh, well, we'll abide by the court's ruling kind of way that you get from Democrats in the US. No, he actually called it a welcome step forward. The trans community in the UK are effectively without political allies, at least not from the two major parties. They are both against trans people right now in the UK. And I cannot even begin to express my frustration, my fear, my sympathy for what is happening over there. And I know that I've already asked that you look into supporting trans folks in the US, but if you are in the UK, you should be focusing locally because you've got plenty of problems over there. And if you are in a position to help and you're not in the UK, well, here's some organizations to consider supporting. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a start. And in the meantime, all we can do is keep moving forward. Do our best to find the people who actually support us, support them in turn, get people who don't either actively want to see us wiped off the face of the earth or would be happy to stand by and let it happen into office. But all this takes time. It's still worth doing. This is the planning. This is the groundwork that the right and gender criticals and TERFs and fascists have been doing pretty much out in the open for the last few decades. We've just been letting it happen. We can plan too. We can work to fix this too, but it's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy. And if you yourself or your loved ones are trans and you need to get away and get somewhere where you feel safer, I really hope that you have the means and the ability to do that. And in the meantime, as bad as things are here, I'm not going to pretend that they're okay over there. And it's compounded by everything. It's compounded by people like Rowling. It's compounded by the BBC. It's compounded by now both the Labour and the Tory party. Much like what's happening in the US. While that is where I make my home and where I was born, grew up, and have made my own family, I'm not going to just sit back while the country that 400 years ago my family originated from, because yeah, I've got ancestors came over on the goddamned Mayflower. Multiple, actually. But I am no more comfortable seeing my country of origin for both sides of my family being pulled apart and infected with this than I am the country that my family has been here since before the founding of. It's all a disaster. And I needed to say something. Sorry that this is depressing. And like I said, next weekend's video is not going to be any lighter. It's also not something I ever wanted to talk about again, but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. In the meantime, I really, really hope that you are able to take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and be safe out there. There's the usual stuff. Yes, I have a Patreon. Yes, I have YouTube memberships, all that. Look, it's all down in the description if you care about that. I don't feel like doing the usual full spiel. Because what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lopfula, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajago, Mary Mello, Mira G, Sir Didymus is my favorite. I've never screwed that one up before. Well, if you want to hear me mess up your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. I'm going to blame you.